Rise of Japan, First Sino-Japanese War, 1894–95. How does a rising island nation outmaneuver a centuries-old empire with more soldiers, more ships, and more swagger? Why did a birthday cake become a symbol of imperial humiliation? What happens when two kings, one rebellion, and a fleet of warships collide in a palace full of secrets? Welcome to Rise of Japan, the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894–95. A tale of ambition, arrogance, and absolute chaos. This isn't just a war story. It's a royal rumble in the Joseon palace, a comedy of errors with cannonballs, and a diplomatic disaster wrapped in birthday candles. You'll meet Hongzhang, the man who tried to fix a broken empire with duct tape and diplomacy. Japan, the overachieving neighbor who brought a sword to a chess match. The Beiyang Fleet, once the pride of China, now the punchline of history. From the fall of Pyongyang in just 2 days to the massacre at Port Arthur, from bamboo spears to battleships, this war had it all. Rage, revenge, and a treaty signed with a bullet. And just when you think it's over, enter the triple intervention, when the great powers crash the party and rewrite the ending. In the late 19th century, Korea was the shy kid at the imperial playground, formerly a tributary of China, but increasingly eyed by Japan like a shiny new toy. Meanwhile, Russia was building its Trans-Siberian Railway like a giant steel snake slithering toward the Pacific, and Britain was playing hopscotch with Korean ports just to keep Russia on its toes. China, still licking its wounds from the Opium Wars and the Taiping Rebellion, was trying to flex its old muscles with a new imperial swagger. Japan, fresh off its Meiji makeover, was strutting around in Western suits and modern battleships, ready to prove it wasn't just another island nation with a samurai complex. Inside Korea, things were no less dramatic. King Kojong was technically in charge, but his father, the Taewongun, was the real power behind the throne. Queen Min, meanwhile, was the political mastermind who made Machiavelli look like a kindergarten teacher. The palace was a Game of Thrones episode with Hanbok 4. Korea's isolationist stance earned it the nickname Hermit Kingdom. But reformers were peeking out the window, admiring Japan's modernity. Conservatives clung to Confucian ties with China, while peasants were just trying to survive corrupt officials and foreign meddling. Enter the Tonghaks, a religious movement founded by Choi Jae, blending Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and a healthy dose of down with the dynasty. They rose up in 1894, demanding justice and spiritual renewal. The government panicked and called China for help. China sent troops to Asan, but forgot to RSVP to Japan until after the ships had sailed. Japan, feeling snubbed and suspicious, sent its own troops. The rebellion fizzled out by June 11th, but the tension didn't. China's Yuan Shikai suggested a mutual withdrawal. Japan's Prime Minister Ito, juggling hawks in his cabinet and British trade negotiations, said, "Nah, we'll stay until Korea cleans up its act." China tried to call in Britain and Russia as referees, but they ghosted the group chat. Then came the diplomatic mic drop. Japan demanded Korea expel the Chinese and embrace reform. On July 23rd, Japanese troops stormed the palace and installed the Taewongun as the new puppet master. 2 days later, Japanese warships sank Chinese vessels at the Battle of Pengdo, including a troopship with 1,000 men. China declared war on August 1st, 1894. The First Sino-Japanese War had begun. Imagine an empire so vast it could swallow Europe whole, but with a military system that looked like a group project gone wrong. The Qing dynasty's armed forces weren't centralized like Japan's sleek modern war machine. Instead, they were a messy mosaic of regional armies, each loyal to their local governor rather than the emperor. These governors treated their troops like personal bodyguards, funding them through civilian plunder and tax extortion, because Beijing wasn't exactly generous with the purse strings. Training? Optional. Modern tactics? Rare. Coordination? A myth. The result? A military that could barely function as a unit, let alone fight a war against a rising power like Japan. Enter Hongzhang, the reformer with a vision and a mustache that screamed, "I've seen things." He knew China's military was a disaster and tried to modernize it. His two proud creations, the Beiyang Fleet, China's naval crown jewel, boasting 2 German-built battleships that looked like floating fortresses. Japan had nothing comparable. On paper. The Hawaii Army, a smaller force with Western training and modern equipment. Think of it as the nerdy younger sibling who actually did their homework. But Li's efforts were undermined by corruption, factionalism, and a government that punished competence like it was a crime. While China was busy squabbling over who got to wear the fanciest hat, Japan was laser-focused. They reallocated funds from the imperial court to the military, trained their officers in Western warfighting, and even cracked Chinese diplomatic and military codes in June 1894. That's not just preparation, that's cheating with style. Their plan? Ruthless and brilliant. Secure communication lines in Korea, control the Yellow Sea, expel Chinese forces from Korea, invade Manchuria, maybe overthrow the Qing Empire while they're at it. On July 28th, Japanese troops moved before the war was even officially declared. They defeated Chinese forces at Songwon, and General Ye Jichao, who was supposed to hold the line at Asan, panicked. Reinforcements were lost at sea, and faulty intelligence made him think the Japanese were multiplying like rabbits. So he abandoned southern Korea and marched his troops 250 kilometers north to Pyongyang, scavenging food like medieval bandits. Pyongyang was a fortress surrounded by rivers, hills, and walls. But General Ye, still shaken from the friendly fire incident, reduced patrols. Big mistake. On September 14th, Japanese General Yamagata Aritomo launched a surprise attack from all four sides, supported by gunboats. The Chinese missed their chance to strike as the Japanese crossed the river, and their cavalry charges couldn't stop the assault. By September 15, Japanese reinforcements arrived, captured the northern gate, and Ye promised to surrender. But he also ordered a midnight escape. What followed was pure chaos. It was so dark and crowded that one could not distinguish between enemies and friends, so all the Chinese took out their weapons and began fighting each other. Some even killed themselves out of sheer terror. Lu Shushan. The Chinese command was split between four generals. Rumors swirled that Manchu troops fled first, while Muslim units fought to the end. Japan took the city, losing only 160 men compared to 2,000 Chinese dead and 700 prisoners, who were treated well. Despite the land defeats, China's Beiyang Fleet still controlled the Yellow Sea, but its commanders were about as proactive as a sloth on vacation. On September 17th, Japanese Admiral Tsukiyuki Ito stumbled upon the Chinese fleet near Haiyan Island. Chinese Admiral Ding Ruchang struggled to form up. Then, in a moment worthy of a sitcom, his second-in-command Commodore Liu fired the flagship's main guns, while Ding and his British advisor were standing over them. The blast knocked both men unconscious. What was the explanation of the Commodore's act in opening fire while the Admiral and I were standing well in sight over the 10-inch guns? I never knew, and I never heard the thing discussed. Vice Admiral William Tyler. With Ding out cold, the Japanese focused fire on weaker ships, setting them ablaze. They then targeted the battleships Dingyuan and Genyuan, knocking out communications and killing so many sailors that the ships could barely function. Admiral Ito eventually withdrew after his own flagship was hit, but the damage was done. Back in Beijing, the fallout was swift and theatrical. Chinese officers falsified reports to avoid execution. Emperor Guangxu appointed Prince Gong to run the war effort. Li Hongzhang was stripped of his honors, including the 3-peacock feather and yellow riding jacket, and Empress Dowager Shixi, in a moment of surreal detachment, decided to have a modest birthday party. Meanwhile, Japan had sunk 5 Chinese ships, losing only 3 damaged. The Beiyang Fleet was crippled, and China's naval pride was reduced to flotsam. After their double whammy victories at Pyongyang and the Yellow Sea, Japan was feeling like the imperial version of a rock band on tour. Next stop, China itself. General Yamagata Aritomo, the warhorse of the First Army, galloped across the Yalu River in late October 1894, heading for Shenyang, the ancestral heart of the Manchu Qing dynasty. Meanwhile, General Oyama Iwao and his 24,000-strong Second Army landed on the Liaodong Peninsula, eyeing Port Arthur, China's naval lifeline, and the only place where their ships could get a tune-up without sinking. Port Arthur was guarded by modern forts and a reputation for being impenetrable. But reputation doesn't stop bullets. The Japanese surrounded the city like a pack of wolves in uniform, and when General Oyama politely asked Chinese General Wei Rucheng to surrender, Wei responded with a counterattack that fizzled faster than a wet firecracker. Within hours, Japanese forces took the inland forts. Their superior firepower, discipline, and leadership turned the battle into a one-sided demolition derby. A foreign observer described the scene. All over the hills, they were chased, and for many miles around hardly 100 yards could be passed without sight of a Chinese corpse. Jaeger 151. Chinese commanders disguised themselves and fled, some probably dressed as humble noodle vendors, and on November 21st, the Japanese entered Port Arthur. Until now, Japan had treated defeated enemies with a surprising level of civility. But then, they saw something that flipped the switch. The severed head of a Japanese soldier on a stake. That gruesome sight ignited a 3-day massacre. Soldier Okabe Makio wrote, "We killed people in their homes. By and large, there wasn't a single house without from 3 to 6 dead. Blood was flowing and the smell was awful." Foreign journalists like James Creelman witnessed the carnage, including the killing of women and children. Death toll estimates ranged from 2,000 to 60,000, depending on whether you were reading a newspaper or a horror novel. The massacre threatened Japan's image, just as U.S. Congress was debating a fairer commercial treaty. Enter Foreign Minister Munemitsu Mutsu, who launched a disinformation campaign in the American and British press to cast doubt on the reports. The campaign worked. Some eyewitnesses changed their stories, and Congress approved the treaty in February 1895. Back in Korea, Japan's puppet regime was unraveling. They'd reinstated the Taewongun, the king's father, but he wasn't playing nice. In August, he asked China for help, calling the Japanese-backed government traitors. He even approached Russia and plotted assassinations. Japan discovered the plot and removed him. But the Taewongun wasn't done. He called on the Tonghak rebels to rise again. On October 12th, the Tonghaks declared a general rebellion. It spiraled into a civil war involving rebels, Japanese troops, government forces, and local militias called minpas. The fighting was brutal. Beheadings, mutilations, scorched earth tactics. Chronicler Wang Hyun described valleys filled with corpses and villages burned to the ground. Japan sent reinforcements. Their 3,000-strong force, armed with modern weapons, crushed the 10,000 Tonghaks, who were mostly wielding matchlocks and bamboo spears. By January 1895, the rebellion was over, but Korea remained bitterly divided. Meanwhile, the Qing court was in chaos. Reformist Li Hongzhang asked for peace talks in November 1894 and again in January 1895, but Japan suspected China was stalling, hoping for Western intervention. So Japan kept pushing. General Yamagata's forces reached Haicheng on December 13th. The city fell, but the Chinese launched fierce counterattacks in the freezing cold. Though they couldn't retake the city, they inflicted heavy casualties and halted Japan's advance. A rare moment of resistance that showed the Qing still had some fight left. Japan had already steamrolled through Korea and Port Arthur like a samurai on rollerblades. Now they turned their gaze to Weihaiwei, China's final naval base and the last hope of the Beiyang Fleet, a fleet that was once the pride of Qing modernization, now reduced to 4 combat-ready ships and a prayer. Japanese troops landed with the confidence of a team that had already won the championship. They captured outlying forts and the walled town of Weihaiwei with ease. Only Lugongdao Island, the naval HQ, remained. Cue the dramatic letter from Admiral Ito to Admiral Ding Ruchang. Will you throw in your lot with a country that you see falling to ruin? Or will you preserve the strength that remains to you and evolve another plan hereafter? Translation: Hey Ding, wanna switch teams before your ship sinks? Literally? Ding didn't reply. Instead, he tried to retake a fort in early February. It failed. Then Japanese torpedo boats sank his flagship Ding Yuan and another vessel. Li Hongzhang sent a telegram that basically said, "No backup. Sorry. Good luck." Ding negotiated safe passage for his men, then committed suicide. The Japanese honored the agreement and even fired a salute from the Matsushima in his honor. A rare moment of respect in a war full of humiliation. Peace talks began in April 1895, but were rudely interrupted when a Japanese civilian shot Li Hongzhang in the face. Yes, you read that right. Li survived, patched up his cheek, and returned to the table like a true diplomatic warrior. On April 17th, the Treaty of Shimonoseki was signed. China agreed to recognize Korean autonomy, pay a massive indemnity, open major cities to Japanese trade, grant Japan Western-style trade privileges, cede Taiwan, Formosa, the Pescadores Islands, and the Liaodong Peninsula. But Taiwan wasn't going quietly. The locals launched a 5-month insurgency, fighting with everything from rifles to righteous fury. Japan eventually crushed the resistance, but it was a bloody welcome to their new colony. Just when Japan was basking in its new status as a great power, Russia, France, and Germany pulled a diplomatic heist known as the Triple Intervention. They demanded Japan return the Liaodong Peninsula, claiming it threatened Korea's independence and regional stability. Russian Minister Sergei Witta even threatened war. If Japan could not be persuaded to relinquish its claim, Russia should begin hostile actions against the Japanese fleet and bombard Japanese ports. Jaeger 200-201. Japan, lacking the naval muscle to fight 3 European powers, reluctantly gave it back. The Japanese public was furious. And then, in a twist worthy of a soap opera, Russia leased the Liaodong Peninsula and Port Arthur from China in 1898. Talk about rubbing salt in the treaty. Japanese journalist Sovo Tokutomi, once a liberal idealist, now burned with vengeance. Japan will break the global monopoly of the Western race and bring an end to the global tyranny of the whites. Mishra 165. Japan's dreams of dominating Korea hit another snag. They assassinated Queen Min, the pro-Russian Korean monarch, and reinstated the Taiwangun. But Russia wasn't having it. They helped King Kojong regain power in 1896, and the king fled to the Russian legation for protection. The First Sino-Japanese War ended with 20,000 Japanese dead, 30,000 Chinese dead, 30,000 50,000 Korean casualties. Korea was devastated. The Hongzhang Sunbo newspaper mourned, "The innocent people who were killed are to be pitied, as well as those who are yet alive." Jaeger 179. China was humiliated. Li Hongzhang lamented, "Affairs in my country have been so confined by tradition. I am ashamed of having excessive wishes and lacking the power to fulfill them." Japan emerged as a rising power, but one still shackled by Western dominance. The Asian Great Game was just beginning, and the next round would be even bloodier. Do you know why 2 empires, one rising, one sprawling, clashed in a war that shocked the world? Do you know what drove Japan to challenge the mighty Russian bear? Do you know who paid the price when Korea became the battleground for imperial ambition? If not, you're about to. Coming up next, the Russo-Japanese War and the annexation of Korea. A story of betrayal, bravery, and brutal geopolitics, where telegrams were as deadly as torpedoes and diplomacy danced with daggers. You'll witness the first time an Asian power defeated a European empire in modern warfare. The secret deals, assassinations, and power plays that turned Korea into a colony. The ripple effects that shaped the 20th century, from World War I to the Korean War. This isn't just history, it's the origin story of modern East Asia. So if you want to understand how the past still echoes in today's headlines, subscribe now. Don't miss the next chapter, because history doesn't repeat, it roars.